WTN. Good morning to you, friends. Dan Mandis here, along with Ken Weaver, Johnny B., and Congressman Scott DesJarlais is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Congressman, always great to have you on. And let's break down some of what we heard last night during the State of the Union. I've been playing all kinds of audio this morning. One of the moments, though, that I thought was particularly telling was when the president was talking about illegal immigration.
My team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now.
So a lot of talking points, of course, Congressman, and I would say that that is what they are, is talking points, because there's a lot of context missing. But, let me ask you this, Congressman Scott DesJarlais. First of all, you're a medical doctor. What do they pump into Joe Biden, get him to be so awake and angry and alert?
I was trying to think about that as I was listening to him. His tongue was thick. He was slurring his speech. And, yes, he was hyped and he was angry. So I'm not sure. I'm guessing it was a cocktail of something. I hadn't seen anything like that since I used to work the Bonnaroo Music Festival as a medical doctor. It was bizarre. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you then. He was clearly trying to engage Republicans in that soundbite that I just played. And what I thought was interesting.
Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh?
And so what I clearly noted, and it's obvious that he wants to engage Republicans. Why won't the president then debate someone like, for example, Ted Cruz on this legislation?
I mean, that was Joe Biden's idea of a debate. Clearly, it was a campaign speech. That's right. Probably as close to a debate as we'll get. He wants to debate himself, a one-sided debate where he doesn't have to answer any questions. He throws out platitudes. It was antithetical to reality almost the entire night. Yeah, I mean, he was angry, he was arrogant, he was condescending, he was snarky. I think he thought he was being clever in engaging. And it's interesting to me that he talks about a bill that was created here just a few months ago to solve the problems that he created over the past 3 years. We wouldn't have needed this bill had he left in place the policies that he dissolved with executive orders on day one. So he creates this massive problem at the border, and including the fentanyl deaths and the murders and rapes and all the things that have been going on. And somehow he still finds a way to blame Republicans, and that was the theme for the night. He denied any responsibility for the disaster that the country's in. He's got record low poll numbers, but yet to him, in Joe Biden's world, everything was going along swimmingly, and the Republicans were clearly the problem, or his predecessor.
Well, when we talk about that bill, by the way, that came out of the Senate, it would legalize 1.8 million illegal aliens a year. It would continue catch and release, basically legalize it. It would not protect the border, in my opinion. And, of course, it would not build the wall. And so you used exactly the right term, Congressman, which is platitudes. And I think the majority of the American people, I believe, understand that. One of the things that I also thought was interesting with the president is that I agree with you. It was a campaign speech. He spoke about Donald Trump an awful lot. And I think when I'm watching the speech, and I'm wondering how you felt about this, I'm watching the speech and I keep hearing him demonize Donald Trump. But the reality is that whether it's our border, it's our economy, whatever it is, we were far better under Donald Trump. When you watch that speech and you watch it live, as I did last year as your guest, it's infuriating, and it does make you want to pull a Marjorie Taylor Greene and just start screaming out.
Yeah, I'll say I've never bit my tongue so much in one speech in my life. I understand decorum of the State of the Union, but there was 10 times I felt like yelling out. He was talking about crime being down. Talking about the economy being good, and Americans are spending over $1,000 more a month on groceries, and talked about inflation being low. Inflation was so high that drove the prices to the levels we can't afford. He acted like housing was going to be affordable. I thought he said something about giving people $400 a month until interest rates came back down, which is another failure of his policy.
Well, let me ask you, Congressman, isn't that what caused the inflation? Was all the free money from the government when we were coming out of COVID? Part of the American Rescue Plan was basically here's a bunch of money artificially stimulating the economy, and then inflation goes up, and now he wants to do it all again.
Yeah, and of course his tax mantra and whatnot. It was such a pandering speech. And here's one thing that was interesting. I was hoping I would run into one of my Democrat friends this morning, and I did, just like literally 30 minutes before this call. And guy Seth Moulton, he's on Armed Services with me. We worked together on multiple national security issues, worked on the Future Defense Task Force. Figure I can talk to him openly and honestly. And he was just flabbergasted that Republicans were so stubborn and that they sat there in their seats and things that they normally would have applauded wouldn't applaud for, and that that we're all under control of Donald Trump, which isn't true. We love Donald Trump's policies because we were in better shape, as you just mentioned. But I was surprised that here was a colleague of mine that I respect that basically was also being critical, because I got to thinking, that can the Democrats really sit there, the moderate Democrats, buy the nonsense that he was spewing? And clearly they did. They think he hit a home run. But, I mean, they're talking about going after, like, Nikki Haley voters or independents. He did none of that. He totally pandered to the left. And, again, 13 of these things, my ass was glued to the seat. And I noticed Speaker Johnson was the same way. I was like 50 minutes in before I stood up to acknowledge, maybe a guest or somebody out of respect. But there was not a bipartisan line that was unifying that he gave that entire speech that made me feel compelled to stand up and say, yeah, we're all Americans, we should all work together. I've never been to a State of the Union speech where I didn't stand up at least a dozen times, and I may have got up once or twice last night out of politeness. And that's not a unifying speech, and that's not what the State of the Union is designed to be presented as.
Well, it's almost like, what's the point of the State of the Union speech anymore? Because you're right, especially when there's an election going on, it was full of lies, and I've spent the morning basically debunking his lies, but it was full of lies, and it was, as you say, a campaign speech. Now, I've got to jump the traffic. I do want to ask you about the moment that Marjorie Taylor Greene did get up and start sort of screaming back at Joe Biden, because I want your opinion on the effect of that, and it's all straight ahead on Super Talk 99.7. It is 7:15, time to check the roads from the WTN Traffic Center. Thank you, Jack. Showers and thunderstorms today, a high of 66. Rain on Saturday morning, cloudy the rest of the day on Saturday with a high of 57. Sunday, we'll see sunny skies and a high of 53. And right now, 57 degrees at Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Congressman Scott DesJarlais is joining us. Now, Congressman, yesterday we had a bit of a debate on the radio program about whether or not the Republicans should heckle Joe Biden. It was my opinion that the Republicans in the room should not heckle him, because Biden tends to get lost and he tends to just sort of fade. And so he had one of those moments yesterday, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene got up and she started screaming at Joe Biden, and it seemed to bring him back to reality. I want you to listen to this very closely.
It's not about him. It's not about me. I'd be a winner. Not really.
So if you watch the tape,
I'd be a winner. Not really.
I'd be a winner. Not really. Then Marjorie Taylor Greene starts screaming, and it like brought him back to reality. And To me, that proves that I was right, that the Republicans in the room should have just allowed him to do what he does, which is get lost in his words. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because all this was prepared for. Clearly, he was prepared for her to ask that question because everyone's wearing buttons yeah, I mean, I thought it could have gone one of two ways. Sometimes he gets rattled and he loses where he's at, but in this case, he was lost and she rescued him. Yeah, I thought his response was very calloused and cold. You know, he says her name, says she was killed by an illegal immigrant, but then so what? People are dying all over. I lost my kids. You know, typical Joe Biden pivots back to his own personal tragedies. And so I thought it was very insensitive, and in a way it had the effect that Marjorie wanted, made Joe Biden look like he really didn't give a damn. But in this case, I think you're right. He was floundering, and it brought him back to reality. I've seen it work the other way, too. But, you know, we were pretty much instructed not to heckle him. Marjorie can't help herself. That's just who she is and how she operates. But, yeah, I would agree with you in this case. It saved him.
I want to play his response because you're right. It did sound callous.
Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand. But look, if we change the dynamic at the border.
And then he just goes on to his talking points. But, you know, you're right, because he did mispronounce her name. He said that her name was Lincoln Riley and not Laken Riley.
Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, not a good moment. Not a good moment.
It was. And it was honestly, I mean, I hate to say you're glad you came last year because it wasn't as painful. This was the worst. I mean, I sat there tight-lipped and just, you know, really, really wanted to call him out on things. I didn't. Because that's not the way we're supposed to do things. We're supposed to do it the way we are now. We're talking about it. You know, I don't know if you watched the Katie Britt response. I like Katie Britt, but you know that was a little bit overly dramatic. But it's probably the toughest job in the world to do the response to the State of the Union. So I'm not going to be too critical, and I don't know if anyone really pays attention to it. But I'll say Biden, even though you know maybe the Democrats thought he had a big night, maybe thought he was on point. He looked tough. To me, he looked like an angry old man. That it was funny. We used to make fun of my dad. You know, you kids get out of my yard. You know, the kind of that crotchety old man thing. And I heard several other people say that, but that thought went through my mind when I heard him yelling at us for the first 15, 20 minutes. But you know, as the night went on, he wore down, he slurred, and we're going to see the old Joe Biden as soon as he gets back on TV. He's not jacked up on whatever they used to hype him up last night, and so you know he may enjoy a moment of a bump within his party or his far left radicals, but I think as this wears on, you're going to see the Joe Biden we all have come to expect.
And it's interesting, Congressman Scott DesJarlais, it's interesting you picked up on that. I said in the 5 o'clock hour that Biden came on strong when he started the speech, but as the speech wore on, he started to lose it, and he started to become befuddled and confused. So, and I think the speech was 67 minutes or so. So he's got about, if you think about it, he's got about 45 or 50 good minutes in him before the wheels start to fall off. And so you're right. And I was reading an article earlier this morning about how there's some speechwriters that are out there saying, and they're obviously Democrats, oh, Joe Biden, you know, put to rest any idea that his age is a factor or that his mental acuity is a factor. Clearly, that is still a factor. And I think clearly the American people know what is going on with Joe Biden. I found it interesting. You did say that you folks were instructed not to heckle the president. That comes from, I'm assuming, Speaker Mike Johnson?
Yep.
And what was the reaction? I mean, we all know what Marjorie Taylor Greene, how she reacted, but what was the overall reaction of, you know, the folks that you know? Were they, you know, sort of rolling their eyes and saying we would really like to engage, or was everybody like, okay, that's fine?
Well, I mean, again, having the benefit of having been here a while, as opposed to some people who have been here 2 or 3 years and have lived in the chaos that's, become Washington. Not that it always wasn't a little chaotic, but it's much worse now than it was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and for those who've been here longer, there usually is a sense of decorum and respect for the office. And so the State of the Union, you realize it may not be your guy up there, but you listen politely. You can, kind of moan and groan and maybe lightly boo, but that's usually, not just one person. That's usually everybody when there's just something so outlandish or so false, which was pretty much the whole night. So, I don't think it's right to yell out and engage, and I think it's probably disrespectful to try to engage him in debates in that particular forum. That's what the press corps is for, and all that. So, I wasn't put off by the fact that they said, you should behave like adults, because I think we all should. And if everyone did that in Washington, maybe things would go a little better. But Biden was probably the worst instigator of that last night, because I really think his whole purpose was to antagonize. It certainly wasn't to unite. And I'd be curious to see how the independents and moderate Democrats or moderate Republicans feel about the speech. But I thought it was the worst one I've ever heard, and it was just full of untruths. And I didn't hear your show earlier. I'm sure you unpacked it, but if you wanted to fact check almost anything he talked about, he projected his failures onto Republicans and acted like he takes no responsibility for his low approval or the state that the country's in. And so I just hope people are smarter and they watch that and they realize that 4 more years of that would be an absolute disaster.
I will say this, Congressman, if you're not really someone who is politically inclined, it really is worth watching this speech just to see Mike Johnson's eye rolls, the speaker's eye rolls, and the faces that he made. But at least he didn't get up and rip the speech like Nancy Pelosi did.
Yeah, Mike Johnson, people are just getting to know him. He's a pretty calm guy. He's a rational guy, but I was impressed by the fact that he was disciplined enough not to take the bait and stand and cheer for what, maybe could have been considered bipartisan applause lines, because they really weren't. They were more attacks. And, his butt was glued to the seat up there too. And sometimes they tell you to take your cue from the speaker. If he stands, then maybe you should all stand. But he wasn't taking the bait either. That speech had a clear purpose, and it was to divide the nation, to attack Republicans, and as you said, a campaign speech.